how to start reading in a foreign language beginner's guide. So basically, if you're here, I'm not going to waste your time. Reading is extremely important when it comes to learning vocab and enjoying the language learning process. And basically, a lot of people struggle with it. So I am going to try and teach you how to read properly in a new language, even when you don't fully understand it, especially when you don't fully understand it, because that's how you learn. And also, I'm going to show you what to read. So you probably also wonder, like, you know, obviously you can't really go straight to difficult novels. You need to start with easier stuff, and that's what I'm going to help you with. So by the end of this video, you will know exactly what to read based on your level and how to do it the right way. So yeah, if you do like this kind of educational content, guys, hit the subscribe button. I am a language learner, a language enthusiast, and now a language coach online. So I am definitely what I say. Please listen to it. I am trying to help you, and let's go. So the big problems with reading, there are really two main problems, and you definitely have at least one, if not both. So the two problems when it comes to reading, which is, you know, how to start reading in a foreign language, is how to actually read. And by that, I mean, you'll understand what I mean, how to actually, like, you know, read things and how you would learn from it. And then two is what to read. So guaranteed you have at least one of these. By what to read, I mean, you know, books, where do I get them, what kind of books, that kind of thing. So with how, I'm going to teach you how to read books and still enjoy it and make sure you're actually learning the language and learning new words. And with what, I'm going to show you what text you should be reading to make progress and still enjoy it. You'll notice I've got still enjoy it on both of these things. And the reason for that is because I think enjoyment is a crucial part of the language, particularly with consuming content. You really should enjoy what you're consuming, because after all, you're learning the language so that you can speak it, read stuff, that kind of thing. And you're only going to really read things and talk about things you enjoy in that language, because that's what you do in English anyway. So yeah, don't sacrifice fun. Make sure you are enjoying it as best you can, and stick around to the end, because I'm going to have a bonus tip on how you can improve your enjoyment with learning the language. But problem number one, how. So how do you read things in a language you don't understand? There are two ways to read. One, for pleasure, and two, to prioritize learning. Number two, prioritize learning, is particularly what I want you to pay attention for, but both of these are important. So when we're reading for pleasure, we're doing a thing which is called reading extensively. Reading extensively means reading without focusing on the words, even if you don't understand them all. So this is what you do in English when you read any book in English. So say you're reading a novel in English, you happen to find, you know, the odd word that you don't actually know, you've never heard it before. Whoa. What happens when you read a word in English you don't know? You don't think anything of it. You don't stop and go, oh my God, I don't know English. You literally just keep reading. So for example, if I was to read, see this sentence, for pleasure, read extensively, this one right here. Imagine you don't know what the word read meant. You don't know what the word read means. You just go, for pleasure, read extensively, and then you just keep reading whatever paragraph it was in a book. You wouldn't think anything of one word you don't know. I presume you know what that word means, but you get the picture. You just keep reading over it. That's what extensive reading is. So when you're reading for pleasure in another language, you're basically just reading it, and if you don't know words, that's fine, you skip over it. So if you read the sentence in Italian, io voglio andare al cinema, which means I want to go to the cinema, and you didn't know what the word voglio meant, which means I want, you would just say, you would see it as I something, go to the cinema, and you just keep reading. You wouldn't think anything of it. That's fairly straightforward. That's how you read for pleasure. Why do I keep doing that? All right, the second way to read is the important one, and it is to prioritize learning. And this is different from reading extensively. When you're prioritizing learning, you're basically reading so that you can learn more words. And of course, if you just read the whole thing and, you know, skip over the words you don't know, get the general gist of something, you're of course not learning any new words. So don't get me wrong, reading extensively for pleasure is still going to help you get better at that language to a small degree, but it's not teaching you new words per se. So if we want to prioritize learning, what we want to do is use the input repetition method. And I have already made a video on this, so I'll have it pop up on the screen right now, link in the description as well. I definitely recommend you check it out. But to sum it up quickly, the input repetition method is 2 steps. Input, so in this case, reading the book, and that gives you words you don't know, and then flashcards. You make a list of all the words you don't know, put them into flashcards, and memorize them. And that is the best way to learn words. Reason for this is because you're going to learn all the most common words anyway, because the most common words like the, etc. or whatever, they're all going to be in every single book or text you read, because they're the most common words. And then the other words are going to be words specific to the topic you're reading about. So if you're reading about the history of that country or just random thing that pops into my mind, you might see the word government or whatever. And if that's what you enjoy reading about, the history of things, that word government is probably going to pop up a lot because it's going to be important with history and you're going to need to know that word. So of course the words you learn that aren't common are going to be useful to whatever you're interested in. That's why this is really good. Definitely check out the full video I did on it, but in short, the input repetition method is a super efficient way of learning new words, and yeah. So that's how you read. If you don't understand it still, pause the video, go back, rewatch it, or comment down below and I will answer any questions as well. But the second problem is what to read. So now that you know how to read things, you need to actually know what to read. And this might not seem, if you don't have this problem, it might seem a little bit weird, but just hear me out because I guarantee you I can help you at least a little bit. So people do stress about what they should be reading, how difficult it is, what it needs to be about, that kind of thing. And this really does depend on your level of skill in the language and your interest. So basically, the better you become in your language, the more options you have to read. Obviously, if you're a complete beginner or, fairly new to the language, you're very limited in what you can read because you can't read advanced things, really, it's too hard. So you are going to have to be reading, practice paragraphs designed for A1 beginner learners and maybe children's stories as well, which I understand isn't that interesting. That is kind of the exception to the enjoyment thing. It's not even that bad when you're starting off, but yeah, you will have to read things you wouldn't read in English, such as children's books and practice paragraphs. Unless you like reading that in English for whatever reason, in which case, lucky you, but I don't. So yeah, that's kind of what you have to do when you're at a low level. Once you get better, you can read anything that interests you. So I'll talk about that in a second. As far as difficulty goes, when you do get better, what you want to do is read things at the comprehensible input level. And if you've heard this before, you're nodding your head. If you're not, let me explain. So what comprehensible input is content in another language that is not too challenging, but not too easy. So if you understand every single word or basically every word, it's too easy. It's not comprehensible input. If you're reading something in another language and you understand basically none of it and you don't even really know what's happening, you can't even get a gist of what's happening really, that's too challenging. That's also not comprehensible input. If it's in between those two things, like in this picture here, and it is somewhat difficult, but you can get a gist of what's going on and you can understand some parts of sentences, words here and there, that's comprehensible input, and that's the word you want, the level you want to be, the difficulty you want to be reading at. So if you're going to read, for example, we've talked about how if you're going to prioritize learning especially, you want to be using comprehensible input. So that way you don't have to write every single word down. That might be too much. But of course, if it's too easy, you're not going to have any words to put into flashcards basically because you understand every word and then you're not making progress. So yeah, that is comprehensible input. A hint as well, just because you are, what do I put there? Reading to learn doesn't mean the text doesn't have to interest you as well. So we talked about reading for pleasure and then reading to learn. Just because you're prioritizing learning and learning words doesn't mean you have to read the most boring text of all time. Reading to learn could be you reading Harry Potter, which you also enjoy. So you can do both of these things. Of course, when you're reading to learn, you're not going to skip over every word. You're going to put words down that you don't know. But yeah, it can still be something you enjoy. As far as reading for pleasure, read anything that interests you. It doesn't really matter because you're reading for pleasure. But yeah, with reading to learn, make sure there definitely you are in this comprehensible input kind of section. But yeah, bonus. So I did say I was going to talk to you about reading stuff you enjoy. If you have stuck around to the end, you definitely deserve this. So how to find things you actually enjoy reading that also meet your level is, I think, a little bit of a tricky thing, but I'm going to sum it up really quickly for each level: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So yeah, just go with whatever kind of sounds right and give it a go. So if you're a beginner learner, basically anywhere between you completely know basically nothing to you can kind of talk, you can say some basic sentences and that kind of thing, you really want to stick to paragraphs and short stories. So there are tons of websites there are some websites that have paragraphs and short stories and stuff in like a bunch of different languages, but generally they are specific to a single language. So if you do need one for your specific language, I can't like link 50 different ones in the description obviously, but just comment below the language you're learning, ask me what you need, and I will find one for you in that language. Otherwise, lingua.com is good because it has like short stories and paragraphs for like 20 different languages, so that will be in the description below. But basically, find a website that has, practice paragraphs, maybe some short stories as well in the language you're learning, and read those. Find the comprehensible input level, like we just said, and use those to learn words. There's also Ollie Richards books as well. I'm just getting a drink, by the way, hold on. You probably know who Ollie Richards is. He's a YouTuber, very famous polyglot. He has written books in a lot of the most common languages. Like I've got 2 of his books in Italian and Russian physically, and then I also have the Spanish and French ones that I have like the ebook version of. They have short stories in them. They're a little bit trickier, but they're good as well for learning vocab. As far as intermediate goes, once you've got to the level where you can kind of talk about very, somewhat basic concepts, you can start to go into trickier things. So Wikipedia is actually really, really good for this because there's Wikipedia pages in basically any of the not really, really common, in most languages, I think. Obviously, there's like 10,000 languages, so it's not going to be in most of them. But in most of the most common languages, you'll be able to find a Wikipedia page in that for basically any topic that interests you. So find whatever topic, a Wikipedia page in English on something that interests you, click the language button and change it into the language you're learning and read that and do the same thing as you would with short stories, except with the Wikipedia page. Just will say, by the way, they're not direct translations, so don't try translating it, like have the English split page with the English and the one in the language you're learning and try and translate it word for word, because they're actually separate things that have been written by separate people. So they're not the same thing, even though they're about the same topic. Just keep that in mind. If you translate it, you're going to have to use Google Translate. But yeah, you can also watch and read the news, kind of. I presume you'll have subtitles on if you're watching the news. But yeah, same as Wikipedia Plus, it's relevant and they're both really easily accessible. So yeah, you'll be informed as well. And easy books, so translations of books / books written for beginners / how do I say this? Books that are translations of books in English, for example, Harry Potter might be a little bit difficult, but you can give it a try at the intermediate level. Books that are translated from English into the language you're learning are generally easier than books written for natives in that language, so you can give those a try. Books written for beginners as well, so for example, the Ollie Richards books are probably somewhere in between beginner and intermediate, but if you can find books like that with short stories for intermediates, that would be good. Same with books written for younger natives. By that, I mean books written in your target language for native speakers of that language, but they're not necessarily for adults. They might be for like 10 to 15-year-olds. So they're not like fairy tale children's stories, but they're not maybe as complicated. Just kind of use your judgment with that. That can be a bit trickier, but yeah. And then if you're at an advanced level, obviously reading things that are for native speakers is what you should be doing. So books written in the language for natives. I've got Fyodor Dostoevsky, who's a Russian author, I'm sure you've heard of, and Dante Alighieri, who was an Italian writer. Just like people like that who actually write books in the language for writers. I can't think of any modern writers. Oh, there's Boris Akunin. He's a modern Russian writer who I kind of like. But yeah, probably read books written by modern writers first, just because books written by like Dante Alighieri wrote books hundreds of years ago, for example. If you're reading books that are very, very old, the language was kind of different back then, so it might teach you bad habits and words that people don't really use anymore. So definitely stick to modern authors, but yeah, reading books written for natives is really good once you get to an advanced level, plus just immersion. So when you're Googling any questions you have, Google it in that language, try and watch the news in that language if you can, write your to-do list in that language, and overall just consume harder content. At this point, you can definitely purchase a physical book. I definitely wouldn't purchase a physical book for the beginner section. You kind of maybe can for the intermediate section. But yeah, at this point, if you're committed to the language and you're good at it, you're advanced, you can definitely purchase a physical book. I like to do that as a nice reward. In fact, I bought the Harry Potter series in Russian recently. It's probably a little bit early for it, but oh well, I'll read it before Christmas. And yeah, the bottom line is reading is essential, but it should be fun, guys. Make sure you're doing it and make sure you're having fun. If you did like this video, drop a like and subscribe and comment any questions down below. I'll have links in the description to a lot of the things I mentioned. And yeah, also my Discord and my website link in the description. And yeah, thank you for watching. Have a good one.